Hebrews, we talked about Jesus being our great high priest, how he is someone who is greater and higher. We talked about the mega high priest, and how he is yet one who is able to empathize, who's been there, done that for us. We're going to look at the Old Testament side of it a little bit today. We're going to look at Job, one of my favorite books. We're going to talk about God being the higher-ups, if you will. That's kind of the title of the sermon there. But talk about God being high, being lofty, being transcendent. And the whole time I've been looking at this passage, last few weeks, I've had this in mind. A song keeps popping in my head. I'm a big fan of music and pop rock music. And there was a song released in 1999 by a guy named Tal Bachman. He was the son of Randy Bachman from the rock band Bachman Turner Overdrive. Listen to rock and roll music, you may have heard that name. The song's name was She's So High. And the chorus recounts how much this girl, this guy has a crush on, is how much better than him. She's so high, high above me. She's so lovely. She's so high, like Cleopatra, Joan of Arc, or Aphrodite. That's she must be something to be compared to Cleopatra, Joan of Arc, and Aphrodite. He must be talking about my wife, I'm just saying. It's getting pretty deep, isn't it? Okay. Put on the waders. But like this girl in the song, this guy has this fascination with God. In many ways is so high above who we are as human beings. A lot of the Psalms, a lot of the text of the Old Testament describes God's transcendence, whether explicitly or implicitly in what God does in the text. Last time I checked, I couldn't part a Red Sea, but God can, right? Last time I checked, I can't bring somebody back to life from the dead, but God did. Especially Jesus did, God the Son. But God is so much higher than we are. And again, as I mentioned last week in Hebrews 4:14-16, talked about Jesus being both distant and relatable. This week, we're going to look at how God is transcendent and other. We're going to emphasize that transcendence and otherness. But despite the bulk of this passage we're looking at today, talking about God's transcendence, there's a little hint at the beginning of God's personal nature. As I mentioned last week, God relates to us. He sent His own Son to be like us in many ways, tempted as we are. You see, our task today is to examine this passage and to temper our fear and respect for God and also His relatableness. There's a lot of people in this world today that want to treat God, Jesus, like a buddy. They want to lose the God aspect of it. Let's recapture a little bit of that today. Got a little bit of a video, and it may be loud. We played with it earlier, but talking about God and His transcendence a little bit. So let me click over to the next slide there. I like that video because every figure in that video, every person is lifting their hands up to God because He's so much higher and greater than we are. But again, the first verse relates to God's personal nature. Now, I've read Job 38 a bunch of times, but I never really noticed this until I started studying more deeply. And one commentator noted this, and it makes sense. God has a personal nature, especially even in this passage. Let's look at verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, now hold on, preacher. Out of that one verse, you're going to talk about God's personal nature. Let's delve into it a little more deeply. In Job 38:1, we find that there's a whirlwind. It's a theophany. That's a fancy word for a God revealing himself to humans. What are some of the ways that God's revealed himself in the Old Testament? We think about, and especially in the story of Moses, burning bush, right? A bush that burned but was never really consumed. That's his theophany. The pillar of fire, God revealed himself to the Israelites. You know, in Elijah, God revealed himself through that still small voice after the wind. But in Job, God reveals himself in a whirlwind. And this whirlwind is kind of think about in the text of Job, it's kind of a mixed bag. Because you look back at Job 1, what destroyed the house in which his children were staying? What took away killed some of his property, some of his livestock? The wind. You see, sometimes the same things in life that hurt us are sometimes the things that bring us relief. And this whirlwind brought Job relief. Just as the winds bring rain, relief to a dry land or a stormy season, so God, in his theophany, brought relief in some ways to Job. You see, God reveals himself sometimes in that still small voice like with Elijah, but sometimes God reveals himself in the fierceness of life. But God revealed himself. You see, this is an act of grace, God showing himself. You see, the sovereign God, he could have taken many different steps to communicate with Job, but this was an act of grace, him reaching down and talking. It's an act of grace. But notice the story, though. The story of Job is a story where you've got all these friends, and you got Job. They take up the bulk of the text. And these friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, etc., they have raised all these different issues, and Job has rebutted them. But at the end, those buddies, those friends fade away. It's just Job and God. Very personal thing going on here. The friends haven't gone through the heartache, the suffering, the loss. Job has. God goes to Job and answers Job. He doesn't deal with the friends. He deals with the one who is hurting. He answers to Job. And even this act of answering is something that's very personal. You know, God, in some ways, speaks to Job. We don't know the medium. You know, in the Old Testament, God spoke through dreams. God spoke through voices, visions. The prophets, especially, the different modes. It's seen all the prophets. You know, Isaiah had a vision of the Lord, you know, on a throne. Joseph, in the Old Testament, Genesis, had dreams. God revealed himself. We don't know how he spoke to Job, but he spoke. A mighty and high God came and spoke to an individual. And even this particular style of formula is important. It's the way the text reads. Notice back in chapter 1 and 2 of Job, God speaks and Satan, the adversary, answers. The only time God answers somebody is in the later parts of Job when Job is talking to God. 38:1, 40 verse 1, 40 verse 3, and 42 verse 1. God answers Job. That's a turn here. Think about this. Earlier in the text, this underling, this being that's lesser than God, the Satan, is the one who answered God. But Almighty God answers Job. Little old Job was important enough for God to speak back to and answer. You know, I'm one of the people that if I have bad customer service or have a bad issue with a place or restaurant, I let somebody know. I try to understand, try to be empathetic with what's going on. Maybe something's happening. But, you know, if I had a really bad experience, I let somebody know. I was like, no, I need to let somebody know this. So maybe the problem can get fixed. I don't try to be rude about it, hateful about it. Let somebody know. You know, and I don't expect somebody from some corporate office somewhere to contact me about maybe some chain restaurant I've been to and things have been hard. But there was a point one time where I had an issue at a McDonald's. I eat fast food way too much, especially with the kids and chicken nuggets. But I had an issue with a McDonald's, and I filled out one of those online survey things out of McDonald's receipt. I didn't really want to get the free thing that was offered for filling out the survey. But I got a phone call at the house from this franchisee's office. And this franchise has got multiple McDonald's around Hickory area especially, and they called me and asked me. This is somebody high up in the chain responded to me. because my business was important. Didn't expect it. I was kind of flabbergasted. How you calling little old me? But I was important to them. That seems a little funny, but you know what? God answering Job is kind of like that. Even though what God says isn't the friendliest necessarily to Job, it's not the most buddy-buddy, God took time to answer Job, to speak to little old Job. God didn't have to. God didn't have to. But he did, because Job was one of his creations, and Job was important. God answered Job. But notice this intimacy of God is elsewhere in the Bible. We find God deals with personal individuals. God dealt with Abraham and Sarah. God dealt with Joseph, Ishmael, Hagar, all these people personally on a personal level. The Psalms and the prophets we find, the Psalms, they offer examples of worshipers who felt God interested in their everyday personal life. The prophets stress the individual commitment to God, even reminded in Jeremiah about the numbers of hairs on the head. You see, God has people in mind. Here's a quote here. God does not act in a capricious, unpredictable way, but is only concerned for people and their good. God doesn't just do things on a whim. One of the things about ancient Near Eastern religion, a lot of these gods are pretty childish and capricious. They just do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. But if you look in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, even the New Testament, God acts for a purpose for his plan, and he lets humans be involved in that. He lets humans and their well-being factor into the plan. God has people in mind. God doesn't act in some willy-nilly way with us. He works for the betterment and good of us. God works despite our pain and even in our pain sometimes to make us better people and his people. So notice, even in the Old Testament, God has discussions with humans. God enters in almost a bargaining agreement with Amos. Amos chapter 7, verse 3. This is from the Message. This is a paraphrase. God, my master, showed me this vision. He was preparing a locust swarm. The first cutting which went to the king was complete, and the second crop was just sprouting. The locust ate everything green. Not even a blade of grass was left. And I called out, God, my master, excuse me. But what's going to come of Jacob? He's so small. And God gave in. It won't happen, he said. And this judgment cycle happens here. The prophet intervenes. God entered into a conversation with the prophet, and the prophet bargained with God. I don't encourage you to bargain with God, but just notice here that what's going on is God reacts to what the prophet's request is. Well, a lot of times that's our prayer, isn't it? Big old God and little old us, and our prayers, our requests, our entreats, God responds to those. God reacts. God cares about us enough to listen to who we are and what's going on and what's bothering our heart. In my little old verse in Job chapter 1, we find that God answered. When you feel like God isn't answering your prayer and God doesn't care about little old me, I get stuck like it sometimes. Who is God? God is so mighty majestic. You know, I've sat up on Crowder's Knob before, looked out towards Charlotte and all the vastness and just gotten humble and saying, you know, God, this whole creation, you're a mighty God. Why do you care about little old me? The psalmist in Psalm 80 talks about that. You know, what is man that you're mindful of him? But guess what? He answers. God cares about us. He loves us. He loves us enough, or loved us enough to send his son to this earth to die on a cross for us. God answers. He cares. He's a personal God, but also he is a transcendent God. He's not just somebody. He is a God who is above and beyond who we are, greater than who we are, bigger than who we are, and as VeggieTales remind us, even bigger than the boogeyman, right? Let's read a little bit more in Job. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? God starts, even though he answers Job, it's not necessarily the most comforting of words. Who are you? He says. Dress for action like a man. I will question you and you'll make it known to me. It's almost like a prosecutor or interrogator bearing down on Job. Who are you? I'm going to question you. You're going to teach me. You're going to make it known to me. And this humbles me every time, this verse here, verse 4. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Where were y'all? Where were we when God created this world? We weren't around, were we? We weren't eyewitnesses to it. You know, if this were a courtroom scene where some of the commentators tend to think that this may be portrayed as a courtroom type scene, maybe. God's interrogating Job in some ways, and you know, Job's not a witness. He doesn't have another eyewitness. He wasn't there. He doesn't know. He doesn't understand. This is above his pay grade, as the old saying goes, right? Let's read a little more. Who has determined its measurements? Surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds that a flood waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods stick fast together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their thicket? Who provides for the ravens its prey when the young ones cry to God for help and wonder for lack of food, or wonder about for lack of food? And of course, this is kind of a hodgepodge of creation. This chapter kind of goes through, and it goes on a few more chapters, kind of talking about, you know, where were you when I did all this? You see, God looks at creation because God's masterpiece is this world. God's masterpiece is us. All the things, all the parts. And God did it all. You know, y'all, I might offend some of y'all, but one of my pet peeves is people talking about how the founding fathers were good Christian people. If you look back and read some of the history about some of these fellows, they were pretty unseemly fellows. They wouldn't really call what I'd call an evangelical Christian, let's put it that way. But one of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, was what you call a deist. Now, a deist is one of these people, especially popular back in that day, in the rise of rationalism and logic and knowledge, especially in the United States. Thomas Jefferson and these deists, they thought that there was a creator God who, almost like a timepiece, created the world, set it in motion, and stepped back and lets it go. That God is not personally involved, for the most part, in everyday life. God doesn't keep things going. He just kind of made it and set it and walked away. It's like almost like a crock pot world. You know, you crock pot, you set it in there and you walk away for a while and go back to it later. That's Thomas Jefferson. He was a deist. You see, the Bible that I read, the text that I read, reminds me that God isn't one of those crock pot type gods. He doesn't just create it and set it and go. Now, God did some mighty things. And you get a really good meal out of a crock pot. But God doesn't just set things and go. God doesn't just create it and walk away. Now, He did do some mighty things. He set this world in its place. He created this world. There are a lot of things in this world I don't understand. A lot of things that human beings can't comprehend about our world. There's a lot of things about even the parts of this earth that our scientists don't understand fully. The depths of the ocean haven't been fully explored. And every now and then you find stories of a new animal or insect or bug that's been found and discovered that we didn't know about before. You see, no matter how big for our britches we get as human beings, no matter how advanced we think our society is technologically, academically, God always finds a way to humble us for the world He's created. God always finds a way to humble us with this life He's put together. He's a God who's done mighty and amazing things. He hasn't just set it in motion, though, and left it be. Every day, He's involved. That breath you took this morning when you got up, no matter what aches and pains you had when you got up, that breath He gave you is from God. The ability to get here today in an automobile, God did that in some way. Most of me, some of those churches are really good with the cars. I can barely change my oil. I can do a few things here and there, but that's about it. But God's allowed people to be in this world, to create, to invent, to fix, to work, to do. That's God working in our world today. The fellowship of believers, this church, being sustained as long as it has, and hopefully will continue to thrive and grow. That's God. That's a God who's working in our world today. That's a God who has created and continues to dumbfound me. Little old me who gets too big for his britches every now and then. This passage talks about a creator God who, it doesn't deal with just manufacturing something out of nothing. It deals with a creator God who brings organization and order to chaos. Go back to Genesis chapter 1. There's this notion that theologians talk about ex nihilo, out of nothing, God created the world. But there's also this notion embedded in the text of God bringing order to chaos. God straightening things out. God did that. It was creation. And God continues to do that today to bring order to our chaos we call life. God works and continues to work in our lives through all the chaotic situations. No matter how much I try to straighten up at the house or my office, it tends to get messy because I'm sometimes a messy, chaotic person. No matter how much I try to put my life in order and get things right, set things straight and have things good, it all goes to chaos because of me. Life is chaotic, but God brings order and stability to our chaotic life. You see, who runs this world? And I found this kind of small on the screen now that I see it, but I'll read it to you. Here's a little quote I found from an illustration book I thought was really applicable. That's a good question we need to ask ourselves. Who runs the world? God used to run it, but now many say He is dead, so who runs it? Some claim the terrorists or communists are running the world. They seem to have a timetable, and they appear to be on schedule. Apprehensive souls remind us of the cunningness and the cruelty in Afghanistan, Europe, the Middle East, South America, Central America, and the United States. Some whites are sure the blacks are calling the domestic shots or telling Whitey they must be in government, housing and employment. So others accuse the Jews of tilting foreign policy for the United States, especially where Israel is concerned. But who runs the world? Politicians, blacks, labor unions, students, environmentalists, the Pentagon. Who runs the world? Don't be deceived. God is in control. There's a lot of groups in this world today that think they run this world. There's a lot of people in this world that think they run the world, that the sun rises and sets with them. But that ain't so. It's Almighty God. No matter how much we're trying to mess up this world with our tribalism, our agenda, and our politics, our destruction of this earth, whatever you want to call it, whatever soup du jour is on the plate, we tend to create chaos in this world. But Almighty God runs this world, and one day He's going to get fed up with our chaos and our destruction. He's going to get fed up with our name-calling and our tribalism. One of these days, He's going to bring down that new Jerusalem from heaven, new heavens and new earth. And one of the things we find in the prophets is this notion of the day of the Lord. And oftentimes that day of the Lord isn't a good thing. You see, God lets us go on about our lives, letting us think that we're bigger than we are sometimes. Even though he tries to humble us, tries to give us wake-up calls every now and then. But one of these days, he's going to set us straight. So we need to get right with him. What does it mean, get right with him? A God who runs the world. He's a personal God who takes interest in each and every one of us. He loves us, gives us the opportunity to get right with him. He cares about us. That involves us humbling ourselves, admitting that we're wrong, admitting that we're imperfect, that we're not God's, but he is, and saying, Almighty God, my life is in your hands. I may think I'm in control. I may think I run this world, but Almighty God, you do. You do. May God humble us. Because I think that when I look at the news and I flip on the TV and I just watch people's how they live life, I think that we forget that there's an almighty God who's watching, who's acting in this world, an almighty God who's bigger than we are. We forget that because we have made ourselves bigger than we should be. I don't think that Job made himself to be out bigger than he was, but he got set in his place. He got reminded by God. Essentially, I can paraphrase chapter 38 in one phrase.